Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Agilution Diaries. My name is Sam. Today, we've got two exciting things for you. One is a big announcement that we have, and I can't wait to share with you. And two is a topic that I think most of us can relate to. This is a topic that we contend with both professionally and in our personal lives. But before we jump into that, I want to introduce our guest for today, Ken Wong joining us. Hi, Ken.
How are
Welcome.
you, Sam? How are you?
Good, good. How are you? I'm excited to have you here.
Thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
Thanks. And for those of you who might be tuning in for the first time with our LinkedIn Live, Ken is one of our in-house consultants at Inspirit Group. He has extensive experience with helping clients to implement large-scale initiatives as well as large-scale system implementations. And over the past several years, Ken has gained deep expertise in product management, lean and agile product management practices and principles. So, Ken, I'm excited to have you here, and I can't wait for us to talk about our topic, which is managing competing priorities. I'd love to learn kind of some of your tips and lessons. And also for those of you who are joining in, please chime in the comments and provide some of your questions and inputs as well. Great. Before we dive in, let me just quickly talk about the big announcement that we have that we're making. Today is actually a pretty big, exciting day for us. It's the first day that we are launching a new practice at Inspirit Group. Our practice is called Operational Agility. And we're excited to have that here. So we'll provide a link to that afterwards for you guys to check out our site. And then we'll talk a little bit about, why we launched that before we dive into our topic. Ken, tell me a little bit about what's happening in your world and what are some of the things that you'd like to talk about today as well.
Sure. No, first of all, excited, obviously being part of the practice and, our official launch. So totally excited about that. I think, from kind of the establishment of the practice, I think that's something that we should talk about here, right? Why it's important, why it's different than kind of the others, the other things you're seeing out there, other things you're reading online. At least for me, I think one of the key things is, we're all, I think the majority of us here and those of you that are tuning in probably have heard buzzwords like Agile, Scrum, those terms used over and over again, sometimes interchangeably. But I think, one of the key pieces that we want to set the record straight from a practice perspective is, we've seen a lot of things kind of done, I would say, half-baked. And we also see folks that have done this right. And we see, folks that have reaped the benefits out of, implementing a well-established Agile practice, Agile enterprise, kind of incorporating that, embracing the mindset, embracing the culture, embracing the structure overall, right? So I think, just the practice in general, to me, why we're so passionate about it, at least for my perspective, is it's just kind of sharing the knowledge across the board from our experiences, our, what we've seen in the field. So I really want to offer that to our audience here, and also want to solicit any of the feedback and any input that other people may have had too. It's a whole collaborative kind of environment.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Ken. It's great to hear that. I have to echo a lot of what you're saying. Is a lot of the reasons and kind of why I'm excited about the practice is kind of in line with what you're saying. While I think while lean, agile, and including even various different types of leadership operations and delivery principle and practices are great, and while they've helped many companies to make their operations and delivery of services to their customers, whether it's services or products, much more efficient and effective, and really become competitive in their space. Bringing those principles and practices into an organization and successfully adopting them to gain those benefits is actually pretty hard. It's actually really difficult. And we've been fortunate to have had experience and opportunities and helping bring these into organizations successfully. And we've also been a part of, situations where we've learned a lot from that too, and we've seen it done. And um, and none of those principles and practices really delve into how best to make the changes needed for successful adoption and application of those principles. I think that's one of the primary reasons is for the practice is actually supporting and empowering and sponsoring any of the organization's leaders who know that they need to make the change and want to make the change successfully, and bringing what we've learned and some of the practices, best practices, and that support to them to help them not only gain the knowledge, tools, and use our experience, leverage it, but to successfully bring it to their teams as well. So that's what I would say is one of the reasons. I think this is another one. You and I were talking about this. A second reason, this is personal reason, and just as important for me is it's also because we've seen what it does, and we've seen how it can transform not only delivery and efficient, but just people's professional lives and their morale and their kind of state of mental health and happiness at work. And to me, that's really the primary driver of why I'm excited about this practice, is because of the amount of engagement and morale it introduces and brings to an organization. And and I think it's very important. And many people talk about employee. I think we spend most of our lives at work, and that time, work should be rewarding, fulfilling, and enjoyable. And that's a very important thing. I would think most of us would agree with that, because if you have employees that are engaged and happy, organization is going to be operating much more effectively, much more. There's going to be much more better collaboration. Your customer service is going to be a lot better. Your teaming is going to be a lot better. You're just going to be a stronger, much more effective organization as a whole. And so I think while people think employee happiness, morale, and that's always been kind of an afterthought, at least historically until recently, I think that's a critical piece. And so that's really one of the reasons why I'm excited about it.
That's awesome, Saman. Yeah, I totally agree with all of your points. I think, at least from what I've seen in the past is, there's the whole, the employee engagement, the team morale. I think it's always an afterthought, right? The focus primarily from most organizations has always been, you have to deliver,
That's important. Absolutely.
But that other behavioral cultural component is kind of not addressed, or is kind of thrown in the back burner when it should be at the forefront to drive that delivery, right? So that's kind of what I've seen.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think, and we use sports analogies all the time, is when you have a team that's, just the team is humming, it's like a basketball team, and they're just, firing in all cylinders. One of the biggest things is that team morale and engagement. And I think this is a good segue to the second thing we wanted to talk about, really the main topic for today, which is, kind of, it came up when we're discussing DevOps, because I think that's one of the challenges we hear about and we see quite often is organizations know the value of modernizing and automating their DevOps, and kind of building those capabilities. But a lot of them have challenges doing that, and it takes a long time to get that on board, simply because they still have their day-to-day jobs. And so that's the topic we're going to talk about is, what can we do? What can some teams do? And I'd love your input on this, Ken, as well as, those of you listening, please provide any inputs. What can teams do? What are some things that they can do? What is that to actually be able to make progress on those things? And what are some of the causes and things that get in the way of that? So I'll open it up to you, Ken. Maybe you can just share some of your thoughts and what are some of the things you've seen.
Absolutely. Yeah. So from a DevOps perspective, I know a lot, again, going back into the delivery anecdote, right? So obviously, nowadays all companies have to compete and deliver as fast as possible, right? In order to make sure you are competitive in the market. So one of the things that I know and I've seen where, you know, the constant focus is on delivery, but with the perspective of DevOps, if we're delivering something, you can only go as fast as your DevOps capabilities and your infrastructure. So essentially, if you have a limited DevOps capability, you can only go as fast as that limitation, right? So to have an over glorified goal or a stretch goal, if you will, to deliver as quickly as possible to compete against company X, when you have a very rigid, very, you know, ill-defined DevOps pipeline or DevOps structure, well, guess what? You're not going to be able to achieve that. That would not be a realistic goal, right?
Yeah, yeah, and I think that's a good point. You can only move as fast as, you know, those capabilities and those processes that you have in place, and you can only move as fast as your you know, your slowest piece or your slowest kind of step in your overall process too, and bottleneck. And so, um, you know, I think that's one of the challenges many of our clients, and even, you know, we've experienced personally too, um, encounter. And I kind of like this. I kind of think of it as if, you know, it's not only just with DevOps, but you can think about this as any other advancement that we need to make. And I think about it as, like, for example, personally, if I have a goal and I want to be physically fit, you know, and I know, because if I'm physically fit, I'm going to have much more energy. I'm going to be happier, just mentally. I'll be much more effective. Um, and I know that, you know, while I can maybe follow some fad diet, or maybe I can like give it, just go all in for a couple weeks, I can maybe, you know, feel a little bit better, maybe even lose some weight, whatever that is. Um, but that's short term. And I know if I want to sustain those gains, I need to, you know, everyone talks about that. It's like just well known, you know, at least work out 20, 30 minutes a day. And I know that I need to do that every single day, or at least five, you know, 3 or 5 days a week, whatever the recommendation is. But how do I do that when, you know, I have a full-time job? I have kids, you know, we need to take care of the kids, and then we have a house. You got to, you know, maintain the house. You've got your bills. You've got all these other responsibilities. So how do you do that? How do you find the time to do all of that? And I think it's the same situation that most, you know, most companies and most of the people we talk to and clients we work with, they're faced with, is how do I, you know, invest in modernizing my capabilities and investing in my future, um, while also doing a really good job at running my business and delivering, and being good at delivering the existing services and products that I have to my customers.
You're exactly right, and I think there's a difference between your short-term solution and your long-term strategy, right? There's a tactical solution, as you mentioned, with your analogy of, you know, trying to get physically fit, right? You can do it for, you know, kind of initially for a couple of weeks, and then over time, how long can you actually sustain that? I think, you know, to your point, I think that the same thing applies from an overarching company perspective, right? Is your pipeline well established enough to support that long-term delivery? Is it sustainable, or is it only good for a couple months, maybe a year or two? So I think from that perspective, from the leadership angle, does it make sense to invest in certain, you know, as you mentioned, like the modernization of different pieces of technology that might aid in the DevOps whole structure itself to make things better? Should we kind of tackle these key components that maybe initially, you know, maybe have like a large upfront cost, but then we can reap the benefits like down the road, as far as like faster delivery. It becomes a smooth oiled machine for the development teams, et cetera,
Mhm.
right? So it's those conversations, those key conversations, if, you know, we obviously can't make an entire change directly right then and there, you know, to support
Yeah,
that.
and I like where you kind of you said leadership decisions and conversations that need to happen. I think that's a, you know, that's a key point you bring up, and we've talked about this a little bit as well. You know, and we apply a lot of these things as, and I think, you know, I think what it comes down to, and I want to hear kind of what you've seen and what you recommend for folks that are listening is, you know, I think how you can say this about DevOps and other anything that has to do with you modernizing or advancing a capability, investing and getting better at something, which is different than just the work we do to just deliver existing services or keep kind of our running and our business and our maintaining our business. This would be like an initiative that we would we would do to just advance some capability we have. And I think how good an organization is at getting to that, and how good they are at, with their DevOps maturity or any other advancement, is directly correlated with how good and disciplined they are at prioritizing, and making prioritization decisions and trade-off decisions at the enterprise level.
Yeah.
Because I think you said those conversations, leadership decisions, and I immediately think about prioritization. This comes down to prioritization. And so curious, kind of like what are some other things you think of, and that, maybe folks can kind of think about or start looking into in order to get some traction, be able to, get the support and focus on this.
I think the prioritization is absolutely key. That should be the number one thing, kind of stemming down from a leadership perspective, from the, like, as it pertains to DevOps, right? Like, if we're going to modernize like an infrastructure, a capability, whatever we're doing to modernize, whether it's advancements in technology, funding for, whatever, that should basically align with what the strategic vision is for that company overall. If the company wants to heavily invest in a specific capability or service line, well, then it makes sense to align that as a priority for that, that DevOps structure, right? Just to make sure whatever we need to do to get there, that should be priority over something else that may not necessarily be along the horizon anytime soon. But, I think that the prioritization piece is absolutely key, because we don't want the company doesn't have time, especially when we're talking about the faster times to market, right? To be competitive in the market in general. Companies don't have time to just kind of, let's go debate whether this is over this, or if they don't.
I think everybody knows about,
if they don't have a good solid prioritization plan, I don't think they're really going to be successful in the future.
Having a good solid mechanism for making those prioritization trade-off decisions, especially at the enterprise level. Right. And I like what you said. You said, saying no. You said, mm-hmm. and because a lot of it comes down to that is, and a lot of people say this too, and I firmly believe it is what's even more important than saying yes is learning and figuring out what to say no to.
Right.
Because we've got 24 hours in a day, right? Our capacity is more or less fixed. Your team's capacity is fixed. It's going to be fixed. And so it's a matter of, how much of that capacity do you allocate to just running your business and delivering your services, and then how much of it do you set aside and allocate to focusing on actually advancing or innovating or doing some of that stuff. And that's where that prioritization decision comes in, and saying no to other things and to distractions.
And I know you and I have seen this multiple times, whether on, in the past or on several projects or clients, right? Everything is basically seen as a number one priority. That can't be the case, right? So right. There has to be some priority, even though everything is deemed as high priority. Well, is this higher over this? Because of these reasons, et cetera. So that mechanism is key, as you mentioned.
Yeah. And so what have you seen? What are some things that happens when everything is a high priority?
I mean, then what I've seen is you have teams that are confused. You have teams that are wondering which ones to work on first. Or what I've seen is, teams are, given a ton, like if we're looking from a perspective of projects here, let's say a team would be involved in 17 or 18 different projects. They're only making minimal kind of progress on each of them, and nothing really comes to fruition. Nothing actually really moves the needle to get closer and closer to a completion. That becomes the problem. Right. So,
right, it's like the same challenges of multitasking.
Exactly.
There's a huge cost and waste that goes, because every time you switch your tasks, you have to get reacquainted, and that's time that you're just wasting rather than getting focused and getting something done so that you can then take the next thing. Yeah, I think that's a
Right.
so I think to sum it up, and I know we're at time here, but to sum it up, it's, the biggest thing we can probably provide, or we can kind of in terms of like think about and look into, is getting, how disciplined you are in balancing the different types of work that you have against kind of your capacity. We have fixed capacity, whether we like it or not. And so it comes down to, the trick is, I think, balancing that and having a mechanism in place where you're regularly making those trade-off decisions of, okay, now we're going to shift our focus so that it's 70% this type of work, 30% that type of work, so that we're not starving one or the other. But
And
yeah,
the last thing
anything else?
the last thing I would add is, and into what we alluded to earlier, it's okay to say no, right? As long as you have a good rationale behind that, right? If that's part of your prioritization mechanism and something doesn't make sense, well, then let's not make it priority, so we can kind of focus on something that is more priority. And it's okay to say no.
Right. And explaining kind of why we're saying no, and
Exactly.
how that's actually going to benefit us.
Right.
And I think that's another challenge too, because a lot of, especially people that are on operational and business side, is, some of them may not be familiar with DevOps and what advantages it brings to them. And I think it's, to your point, it's important to also articulate that, especially for technology leaders, is, yeah, because by doing this, we're going to be able to, give you enhancements, new capabilities, new things faster. We're going to become more competitive and so forth. So, yeah.
Got it.
Great. Well, thanks, Ken. Excited. We'll provide a link to our site and operational agility. We'd love to hear from you guys. What are some of the things, tips, and I know we don't have a lot of time to jump into some tactical stuff on these LinkedIn Live, but anything you'd like to share with, what have been some things you've done to make sure you get some traction on implementing your DevOps and modernizing your DevOps capabilities, while also delivering on your, typical work, whatever that may be. Because we all know the challenges that comes with that, especially for DevOps engineers who are brought into an organization, and it's like, I can't get traction because, I can't get time with the software engineers and people that are builders of the applications to work with them on it. So thanks a lot, Ken. I hope everyone has a great rest of the week, and looking forward to, tuning in and our next episode. Thanks.
Thanks, Simon. Thanks, guys.
Thanks. Bye.